Crystal Stokes here with Get Stoked, a podcast with real and raw conversations with leaders of all types, business owners, managers, executives, and more. Get stoked by their honest and insightful stories and key takeaways that you can use to improve your leadership abilities. Now, if you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe and share it with others. Your support and feedback really makes a difference. Now, without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, hey everybody, Crystal Stokes here, and I am very excited to welcome Jean Marie DiGiovanna. She and I were introduced through a mutual friend. They said, you absolutely have to meet this woman. You're going to love what she's working on, what she's up to, and the energy that she brings to the conversation. So Jean, I'm really excited to have you here today. I'd love for you to just introduce yourself and tell us what you're all about.
Sure. So it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. So basically, I am a keynote speaker, corporate trainer, and executive coach. And I focus primarily on leadership development, team effectiveness, and innovation. And I've developed a body of work about 5 years ago. I mean, I've had my business for over 20 years, but like many people, you kind of do a lot of things, a lot of different trainings. And I realized, I've been actually teaching leadership development all this time. So I finally packaged it up and created a body of work around what I call Renaissance leadership. And so that's kind of the premise of or background of a lot of my work. So I deliver now sessions around what does it mean to be a Renaissance leader? What are the qualities, the traits, the principles? And that really spans so many other leadership topics around psychological safety, emotional intelligence, and really any specific skills that leaders and their teams need to have in the workplace.
Fabulous. So where's the best place for us to start? If we want to get an idea of this framework of Renaissance leadership, could you walk us through that?
Sure. So the first place I typically start is I have several principles that I call the 5 principles, basically, of Renaissance leadership. And this is the premise of the body of work. And then there's obviously traits and skills, but I'm happy to step through the 5 kind of just at a quick high level. And if there's anything that you want to dive into, just say so. But the first one is to ask new questions, like ask the questions no one is asking. And if you think about the times that you've grown the most in your work or your life, typically it's because of it's spawned off of a powerful question, an inquiry, something we were curious about. Or when someone asks us a powerful question, we go to a certain place that we haven't been before. So when you think of Renaissance leadership, the premise actually came from the period of the Renaissance, which was a time of rebirth. It was a time of invention and innovation. And so what I believe is at this time in history right now, we are actually going through a rebirth of humanity. And so it's kind of like we're in a new Renaissance. And so that's why these principles are so important. And so the second principle is, you can ask all the great questions, but how are we listening, right? Are we open to the answers? Are we getting more curious? And so the second principle is called honor the diversity of ideas, diversity of people, of cultures, of perspectives. And obviously this is so important today more than ever. And then the third principle is what I call connect to innovate. So if you think of really great ideas that came up, typically they aren't when you're working on it. Typically they happen when you're in the shower, you're doing the dishes, or you're collaborating with someone who is completely different from you. And so this principle is all about getting together with people that are not like you, that don't think like you, so that it opens up your perspectives. That's what kind of improv does too, is it forces these new connections to create new ideas. And then the fourth one is what I call act with accountability, right? We take actions in the workplace all the time. but how many of us actually hold ourselves accountable? And how do we hold other people accountable? So it's really about taking responsibility and having that integrity about your own actions and inactions, right? When we don't take it, are we being responsible in that way as well? And then the last one kind of pulls everything together, because the last one is called Magnify the Impact, meaning the impact of ideas, of solutions. When we innovate, oftentimes we kind of innovate in our own silos, right, at work. And then we have this great idea. We work on this project for a client. And then what happens to that great knowledge? Oftentimes, nothing else happens. Right. And then, another part of the organization is working on something that could benefit from that, right, but they don't know about it. So it's about taking our ideas and actually magnifying them out, sharing them with other departments, other groups, other organizations, so that we can actually have a really incredible base of innovation. So that's the premise. And then everything else kind of works off of that.
Oh, I love it. Just going back to the beginning with starting with the question, if you don't mind unpacking that a little bit, because I feel like what often happens when we hear a list like this, it's like, okay, I got it. We breeze through it, ask a good question, listen more deeply, yeah. But when we actually think about implementing that, I think it's actually quite challenging. This is why people like you and I have a job, to really help turn this into a reality. So can you speak a little bit more, just for that starting point, about asking the deeper questions, asking questions that lead to these conversations that actually shift the leadership quality and potential within a person or an organization?
Sure. So one tip, and so I'll share a practical tool that you can use, is if you think about the kinds of questions we typically ask and where our mind goes a lot, they're often why questions. Why did we do this? Why did you do this? Why are you doing it that way? Why didn't you do this? Right? And so one really powerful way to ask great questions is to shift your why to what or how. And so a what or how question opens up the dialogue, right? It actually engages the other. So the power of asking questions is asking open-ended questions, but instead of why, which takes us back into our head, analyzing and then wanting to find a reason, right. As soon as we shift that into a what or how question, now we create movement. So that's kind of a big distinction. And when I do exercises with groups where I literally have them have a dialogue with each other where they can only ask each other what or how questions, it's incredible because you're having to think about it first. Yeah. And you're not wanting to put words in the other person's mouth until they're done talking. And then you're listening for like, what else is there that I want to get curious about?
This one is so fun. For me as a therapist, I also use this exact same tool. And I don't remember if I learned this in coach training or in my master's program. I don't recall. But the foundation of how it was explained to me is that when we are asked a why question, it actually sends us into a defensive mode. You're to say, Crystal, why did you respond to the email that way? I'm going to be like, what do you mean why? Because I was trying to just do it the right way and I'm going to defend myself. And it's I automatically feel a shutting down. But if you were to ask me, Crystal, what were you thinking in the process of writing that email? Walk me through your thought process. Or how are you experiencing that email as you wrote it or when you sent it? Then I go, how was I? Or what was that like? And I start to be curious about my experience and I feel comfortable. I don't feel threatened. I don't feel defensive. So I feel like that tool you just shared is extremely powerful, not to be underrated. And I know this for most of us, if we track our dialogue with people, we realize how often we say why. Why? And to start shifting that, like try going a week without using why.
Yeah.
And notice the difference it makes.
Exactly. And I'm glad you pointed that out around the defensiveness, because that's often what why questions are. And I want to make one distinction, which is a powerful why question is, why is that important to you? Or why this, why now? So I do want to just, because I always often get when I train, they're like, well, what about this question? And I say, yes, that is powerful. It's just to notice when we put the other on the defense and when we don't.
Yes. And when to use why strategically, noticing that what is the impact that question is having. And I also want to highlight something else you were bringing into this conversation, which is when we are in dialogue with a person, notice if we're anticipating what they're going to say. Like, I'm going to ask you a question and I expect you to say this so I can further my agenda, versus I'm asking you a question with pure curiosity, hoping I don't actually know what you're going to say, being in that space of wondering and interest alongside you.
Yeah. And that is probably one of the most difficult skills that we have to learn as humans, which is to wait and to not have an agenda. It's an incredible space to hold for another person when we are simply listening, meaning we are literally putting everything in our head to the side for that moment and being 100% present and letting go of, am I going to reach my agenda? And it is a skill. I call it an art. There's some science, but it also is an art.
Yes. And it's not easy to learn. When I was in school, we had a course specifically on this in my master's, where what we had to do it with each other, pair up with another student. Oh my gosh, we had to record ourselves where, let's say I'm working with you. I would ask you a question, Jean Marie, blah, blah, blah. You would answer it. And then I would have to repeat back, okay, what I heard you just say is X, Y, Z. Am I getting that right? And then you might say, yes, except blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is this. And did I get that right? And you say, yeah, you nailed it. And then I would just say, what else? Tell me more. And I remember feeling as a student, I'm never going to get anything done. This is going to be the biggest waste of time. I will be a giant failure as a helping professional because we will just sit here and go in circles. Guess what happened? The opposite. It was actually magical that just releasing control and letting something emerge. And I think what you're saying, it's an art form, it's a skill. You have to practice it. So when you're working with leaders in your profession, how do you advise them to practice these things?
Yeah, the biggest skill that I actually help people practice is the skill of curiosity. And so that is the actual skill that will help with powerful listening. And so anytime, and I do a similar exercise in my trainings where each person comes up with a challenge they're facing and they have to coach each other on that challenge, but the coach can only ask powerful questions, or like you said, tell me more, or say more. Can you say more about that? And they have to ask a follow-up question that has to do with something they just shared, right? Which means you've got to really listen intently. And this, just by doing this for a 5-minute exercise, is so incredibly powerful. And really it's like flying a plane. Like the more we do it, the better we get. And the more we trust our conversations. And I can relate, when I was in coaching training, we had to do these exercises. I kept thinking, I have to have that next question to ask. Like that makes me a really good coach. And as soon as I got to a point where I could trust in the process, we always got to where we needed to be. And a great facilitator does that too. It's like, I know we're going to get there. And by me listening intently and more deeply, I can understand all the pieces that are involved. And then I'll have more powerful questions to follow up with.
I love that. I think you and I both trained in the same institute, the Coactive Training Institute.
Yeah.
Is that one of yours?
Yeah.
Did they ever use this expression of, I think it was dance in the moment, something about that? So it was really control. And maybe that reminds me of what you said earlier about improv as well, where in improv, you can't plan ahead what you're going to do. You have to be responsive to what's emerging in the moment, and that you've built that trust and you help other leaders build that trust in themselves to simply be in the moment without a plan, and to know that you will respond accordingly when necessary, and that it all works out.
Yeah. And one of the things I'll say in terms of application, like where does this show up in the workplace, is as a leader, one of the biggest challenges that's happening today in many industries is, we've heard of the Great Resignation. People are no longer tolerating being disrespected or not having a voice or not being able to utilize their gifts and talents. This is a perfect place for powerful questions to come into play, because as a leader, we can ask questions to get to know who we're working with, who's on our team, who's reporting to us in a human way. Like, what makes you tick? What motivates you? What are the gifts and talents you have that we're not even utilizing on this project? And that kind of ties back to the Renaissance leadership, because during the Renaissance period, those leaders, they literally had an incredible depth and breadth of talent, and they were valued for all of it, not just pieces of it, because we hire someone for a specific role and that's it. And it's like, oh my God, we're missing out on all this talent that's sitting right in front of us if we just asked and got more curious.
It's beautiful. It feels like we're bringing the human element back into our workforce. And I think I agree completely that we are in a renaissance, that things are really shifting with how we are engaging as workers and as leaders, that we don't want to be a cog in a wheel. We don't want to, it's like the Industrial Revolution is dying.
Right.
And we're now like, oh, I'm actually a person with feelings, and this needs to matter to me. I'm not here just to collect a paycheck. I'm not here just to punch the clock. I'm here because I want to make an impact and I want to be a part of something bigger. And how we can help people feel included in that. Are there other parts of the model that you'd want to take us through? Because it feels like we kind of went through the initial stage of questioning. We were touching on how to deeply listen. What do you want to say on listening or moving into innovating?
There is one thing I'd like to say on listening, which is the power of listening for what's not being said. And this really requires us to tap into the unknown. It's like our intuition, what we're sensing, what we're feeling, what's kind of there, but we can't point to it. And often, people might refer to that as a gut feeling. Like, I know they've just shared that with me, but I feel like there's something else going on. And then we can simply just ask a question to validate it. And by asking the question, we're always going to get some kind of movement forward. So listening is not just for what's being said, it's for what's not being said, and then getting curious about that.
Do you have an example you might be able to share?
Well, even the example I just mentioned, like, let me think of an example even more recently. For example, I'm working with a leader who I do a leadership disc for leadership, and there's different styles of leadership. And this particular leader is high C, meaning they're very much into accuracy of data. And some people might even say that, there's not a lot of leaders with a high C, like they should really have a high D. And the reality is that every single style can be great leaders. And as we were working more together, it was clear to me there were certain areas he did not want to go in terms of emotional intelligence. Now, even when I asked him like literal questions, there was avoidance in certain areas. So I just asked outright, so how does it feel to go down that path? Instead of saying, oh, I think there's a path that you're not going to, it's like, well, what do you experience when you have to address that? And then let them explore that, right? Because it's all about uncovering what's there, that by uncovering it and making it aware, now we can do something about it.
Oh, I see. So an example you're giving, let me see if I'm getting this right, that by asking him that question, it's more about just bringing it to his consciousness that, how does that feel? He may not have even been aware that he was avoiding.
Exactly. And then he can make the choice of, like often, a great leader will do this and help the other see something they didn't see before. So in a way, you're almost like a mirror. And it's not manipulative at all. It's just, you're kind of just reflecting back what you're hearing and helping them see something they didn't see before.
It's such a gift because I feel that in the way we normally talk, it's not reflective. It's like you're having your thought, now I'm having my thought, and it's almost competitive.
Yeah, exactly.
And it gives them the gift of, I hear what you're saying, I'm just noticing this. You say, oh, like, wow, there's a slowing down, there's a deeper knowing, a deeper seeing that can really help a person evolve.
Yeah. And a great question, if you're kind of noticing something and you're not sure, you could simply ask, what's the thing you don't want to talk about around this topic? It's kind of like, you can kind of just, and it's sort of a funny question. It's like, oh, but then they'll typically stop and think and go, well, there might be something here.
I love that one. I also really love, what are you currently tolerating? We just dismiss that. Like, oh, I just tolerate it. I just put up with it. So I don't need to talk about it because it's in the tolerate bucket. To see what are those things we're tolerating? Anyway, we could get into weeds with all this. I'm just trying to keep us on track because I'd love to be able to fully get through your model. I think that each of those steps will be helpful to our listeners today.
Sure.
Could you speak more to this aspect of innovation? I don't have all the language correct, so feel free to elaborate and correct me.
Yeah. So when we work together, we often will brainstorm, we come up with new ideas, and then we ultimately innovate, right? It's like an idea turns into an implementation. And I love this example. So I had done some research. Nissan Design Studios started in San Diego way back. And the head of Nissan Design Studios was tasked with creating a more innovative team. And so he would often, if he noticed the team was struggling, he would often go send them to a movie. Like, go out of the office, watch a movie, come back, and then we'll restart this conversation, right? Because he knew that it's just like when you go out for a walk, or we meditate, or we just take a time to breathe. It's all about changing our state, which then changes our mindset and thoughts. So what he would do occasionally is he would take on projects and have his team design something completely different. So he took on this project of having the team design children's furniture. And this was such a brilliant example where when they were getting to the point where they had to paint the furniture a certain color, they were thinking, well, what color should we paint it? You typically think, oh, the primary colors, that's what kids like. But here's what they did. They went into kindergarten classes and they sat next to the kids when they were coloring. And they started noticing which of the crayons were the shortest, because obviously they were used the most. And you would think, again, they were like bright orange, and no, they were actually really subtle colors. The ones like cornflower or mauve, or, they were more pastel-y. And so what they did was they painted the furniture those colors. So this is what I would say, like, this is how a Renaissance leader thinks. Like, who would think to connect, the audience, like the kids and coloring, to the furniture? And so this is kind of, this is what I mean by connecting to innovate. And really back in the Renaissance, Medici, who was a big banker, he would bring together all these different people, philosophers, politicians, journalists, artists, engineers, scientists, to solve problems together, because he knew that all these different perspectives, you'd come out with something pretty incredible.
Oh, that's so fabulous. It reminds me of the idea too of separating your editor from your creator. That we can get into that playful space, like you mentioned, shifting out and going to see a movie, or just watching children, like how inspiring it is to just observe them, and they're freer. They don't have as much of an editor yet built onto their shoulder, and then the amazing that come from that. And then after a person, so when a leader is helping take their team through the innovation process, let's say they're coming out with something. I know your next stage is about this act of accountability. Can you take us from innovation?
Yeah, I mean, basically, this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? It's kind of like we typically go through the process as a leader. We say, okay, what are you going to take on and by when? And everyone agrees. Or, at the end of the conversation, you say, do you understand what you're supposed to do? Yes, I do. And they both leave. And then a week later, they come back together and it's completely not what the person, what the leader requested. What they got back is completely different. So first off, in that scenario, the tools I typically give people is paraphrase back what I'm asking of you, or ask them what they will take on and what that will look like, so that as a leader, you can validate that. And just very similar to what you shared earlier is like, here's what I'm hearing you say, right? And so that's how you get clarity. It's not a yes or no question. And then secondly is, how do you hold someone accountable? It's actually not possible. It's kind of a myth, because we have to hold ourselves accountable. And the best way for a leader to do that, and most effortless way, is to have the other person take ownership of it. What will you take on and by when? How do you want to be held accountable? If it turns out something comes up that shifts the timeline or the functionality or whatever, this action is not going to get done like it's supposed to, how will you address that? What will I need to know by when? You talk through that all, and then ultimately the other person is answering all these questions, so they own the process. And so accountability doesn't have to be so stressful and frustrated. And it often is, because we think as a leader, we have to keep nagging. It's not about that.
I'm just so excited about what you're saying. This is such a crucial conversation. I want to highlight this with a bell, like ding, ding, people listen to this. It's important. And accountability is a myth. I should just put that at the top of the for this. Right. Absolutely. Because it's not about holding somebody else accountable. It's about fostering agency. It's just with a kid. Are you going to hold a kid in the pool with the little floaty wings and be like, I got you, don't go underwater. I got you, don't do it, don't go underwater. We're going to let that kid learn to swim, teach him, how do you tread water? How do you work yourself into the deep end? And I love your process of really showing that a leader is a teacher. You're helping them discover their decision-making process. How are they going to deal with roadblocks along the way, anticipate them, helping them really think through their own inner support system or what they need to recruit around them. It's such a fabulous thing. When you said that, I felt myself relax. Like, I can imagine other leaders listening to this relaxing, saying, you mean I don't have to,
you don't have to take it all
people accountable. Right. I can just help have conversations that help them have agency and support.
Yeah, it's holding them to account.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of holding them accountable. And it's actually the first chapter of my book, which covers the culture of accountability. And those 3 questions are in there, where if you literally ask those 3 questions at the end of every conversation, you will literally start to notice that others will take more ownership. And then it becomes really easy and more fun to lead a team.
This is so exciting. Now, we have a little bit of time left. Let's talk about the last part about magnifying the impact. And if you want to tell us about your book as well, feel free.
Yeah, sure. So magnifying the impact, again, points to, it's kind of like seeing way beyond what you currently have a vision of right now. And so as you're working on your teams, your projects, your deliverables, meeting the vision of whatever you're working on, it's like, oh, who else could benefit from this? What other department could leverage this? How else can we share this so that other people can really apply this, right? And so if we don't think that way, we just move on to the next thing. And I can't tell you how many organizations I work with where I will literally work with a group and they will say, oh yeah, we created that, or we brought in someone for that training, right? And then another group will say the same thing. And I would say, well, did you know the other had that training like maybe 6 months before. No, I didn't even know that. Right. So it's like, these are inefficiencies and duplication of effort and time and money. And so it's really about a mindset of, whatever I'm working on, how can we expand that out? Kind of like the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
When we drop a pebble into the water, it's like, oh, wow, how can all of our ideas and really great processes and ways of working, how can others benefit from that?
I had such a wonderful example of that with she was somebody I interviewed here on the podcast, and she is, I believe, in the operations position for a veterinary hospital. And what she created was, communication is really difficult, just trying to keep people on the same page. And she built a protocol for implementing Slack across the organization. She's just such an amazing systems thinker, named Shira. And now what she's thinking about, because she's just a natural go-getter, is how she could bring this to other veterinary hospitals, because we know it's just a problem across the board. And she's like, nationwide, how could I share this? Like, I have a manual, I could just give it to you and I could help coach you through implementing this. And I was like, brilliant woman.
Yeah.
By the way, anybody listening, if you want information about implementing Slack in your veterinary hospital, just me and I'll connect you with Shira. But that's exactly what you're talking about, is thinking whether impact within your organization or maybe even beyond your
outside
organization.
I mean, it's just thinking a lot bigger than what you're responsible for today, right? It's like, that's really what it's all about. And so I know you asked about the book. There's one other thing I do want to mention that goes back to the honoring diversity. One of the things that I would say one of the biggest desires that employees have in organizations is to feel seen, heard, and understood, and to honor more of their gifts and talents. And it's like, we may not even know, we could work with someone for 3 years and not even know they enjoy bird watching, right? Or running, or whatever all these other hobbies are that people do outside of work. And so I mention this because the Renaissance, when I talk about Renaissance leadership, it's honoring the whole person, not just the pieces responsible for what they do, and to see how you could integrate more of who they are in the work so that they feel more valued. So I just wanted to share that because, it's something I'm continuing to do in my own business, and I'm a part-time I've always been an artist. It's like part of who I am, but it hadn't been until the last few years that I actually integrate more of my art into, look at this, so perfectly timed, into what I do and who I am, instead of compartmentalizing everything. Right. So, anyways, I just wanted to share that to kind of,
Can you tell us about your background?
So my Zoom background is a piece of my artwork using alcohol inks. And so, I have my artwork online, and the designs are on many different products, but one day I just uploaded them to Zoom, and I'd have fun with some meetings with colleagues and peers, and they were like, "Oh wow, can I get that background?" So, anyways, that might be a future little project. But I mention that just to reiterate how important it is to honor the whole person, not just the person you see at work. So yeah.
It's so beautiful, this idea of just being holistic, seeing us as entire humans, that sure, we come into a project or into a company with a skill set that was desirable, but what else is there?
Yeah, exactly.
Our, employees can feel more fully seen, and that all the different parts of them are included, like me being an animal lover.
I know. It's perfect timing. We get to see your cat now. It's like, wow, this is awesome.
One of 3, and this one is semi-blind, quite old, but she's a snuggle bunny. So she likes to come in and say hi during these podcast episodes. Her name is Texie. I agree with you, though. If you think about it as a leader, like, well, why would I bother putting all the effort into helping people feel more included? I'm busy, damn it. I don't have time for this. Well, Actually, I'd say the opposite. You don't not have time for it. This is a part of company culture. And I know it can be an overused phrase, but really, what makes people want to stay and work for you? What makes people want to do an amazing job. They need to feel alive, connected, that this matters, that they are really being seen and included for who they really are.
Yeah.
That's why you have people want to be there and want to do the work.
Right. They're there because they want to, not because they have to. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I'll leave the listeners with a specific question that is great for that, which is for leaders, which is to ask, what skills have I overlooked in you that either have been underutilized, undervalued, or not even distinguished, right? It's like, what have I been overlooking that really needs to come out? And so that's one of the questions of many that I'm kind of obsessed about questions. So
what I'm taking away too from what I've learned from you today is you have a superpower for seeing the unseen and asking the unasked. And I think it's so refreshing to, when I was studying, Jung, he talks about the shadow. We all have the shadow part of us, but it needs to be brought into the light and included. And there's such a relief and a freedom that comes with including these things that are often in the shadows. Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you bringing that into our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask you just a quick rapid fire question for my own curiosity and those listening? Do you have any type of routine or regular habits that just help you stay at your very best?
Great question. I don't do this daily, but what I will say is something that I do and is so important to me is meditating. And it doesn't even have to be formal, but I would just say quieting my mind and breathing and just letting my intuition come through to help me with any challenges I have and to just ground me at the start of a day, to set my intention, to send my gratitude and identify what I'm really grateful for, and to come up with a way of being that I think will help that day if I want those intentions to come true. So those are just ways that I set my day at the start of the day.
Nice.
That really helps.
Like using that practice to feel in alignment and attuned with how you're going to move through the rest of your day.
Yes.
Oh,
getting outdoors. That's a huge one for me. So if I feel stuck, if I'm frustrated, if I'm whatever, getting into nature in any way. And that can just be going for a walk outside for 5 minutes. But that's really, really important to me.
Me too. That is what I've always said to people. That's sort of my religion, is connecting with nature. I find it so grounding, inspiring. It just, fills up my cup in so many different ways. It's really magical. So in closing today, I know there are people that are going to listen to this. They're going to know, they want to know how to find you. What about this book? What are the best places for them to learn more about you or connect with you?
Sure. So the best way is to go to jeanmariespeaks.com. And so that's my business site. You can sign up right on the site. Below the banner is a quick tool with 10 questions to help unlock talent on your team, to unlock new ideas that you can just sign up for. And then as a result of that, you'll get monthly tips, leadership tips as well. And then my book, Stop Talking, Start Asking, what a surprise, has 27 questions to shift the culture of your organization. And a little side note, there are more than 27 in the book, but you'll see that when you get there. And that can be found on Amazon, of course, but you can get some bonus tools if you purchase it, and then go to stoptalkingstartasking.com and everything's there. So yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me.
I'll link all that up in the show notes so people don't have to search for it. It'll be right there. They can just click on the link. And Jean Marie, I really appreciate you being here with me today. It's been such a fabulous conversation, Kat included.
It's been wonderful. Thanks for having me, Crystal.
All right, have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you feel stoked after listening to this episode. And as always, I would love to hear your comments and feedback. Is there a topic that you want to know more about? Please let me know. And thank you again for subscribing and sharing your favorite episodes with others. It really means a lot.